I was looking at the RIAA certification numbers this morning, and it just doesn't compute. It really defies the laws of, public relations. It defies the logic of cancel culture, and honestly, it just defies the basic physics of the music industry.
It really does.
You have an artist who has been dead since 2018. An artist who didn't just have allegations, but we have audio recordings of him admitting to heinous violence, and yet, sad is Diamond.
Diamond.
Not platinum, Diamond. That is a tier occupied by, the Beatles, Michael Jackson, Drake. How?
It is the ultimate paradox, and that's what we're looking at today. Jahseh Onfroy, who the world knew as XXXTentacion, or just X.
Right.
Usually, when we do these deep dives, we're trying to shine a light on something that's maybe a bit obscure. But with X, the problem isn't obscurity at all. It's that everyone has a completely different version of him that they cling to.
Oh, absolutely. To some, he was a genius.
A prophet of sorrow. To the kids in the mosh pits, he was the only guy on the planet who understood their depression, their alienation.
And to the critics, or, to the law.
To the critics, and frankly to the legal system, he was a monster. A symbol of everything wrong with toxic masculinity. A dementic abuser who, let's not forget, was charged with beating a pregnant woman.
That is exactly where I get stuck. Because usually society, it picks a lane. We either cancel the monster or we find a way to exonerate the genius. With X, we did neither.
No, we did both at the same time.
We did both. The collective culture here, we made him a global superstar while he was awaiting trial for witness tampering and aggravated battery. It makes no sense.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We aren't here to retry the case, though we have the court documents, and they are grim. We aren't here to just review the albums.
So what's the goal?
We need to figure out how this specific kid from a juvenile detention center in Lauderhill, Florida, managed to hack the cultural operating system. We need to look at the rise of SoundCloud rap, frankly, the weaponization of mental health, and that very uncomfortable question. Can you separate the art from the artist when the art is the violence?
Let's get into the sources, because the biography here isn't just, he was born, he rapped, he died. It reads like a Greek tragedy written by a Florida court reporter.
It really does. And to understand the end, the BMW i8, the robbers, the assassination, you have to go all the way back to the beginning, January 23, 1998, Plantation, Florida.
Which sounds so idyllic, Plantation, Florida, but the reality for Jahseh was anything but. The sources we have just paint this picture of immediate, chaotic instability.
Instability is putting it very mildly. His mother, Cleopatra Bernard, was very young. She had significant personal struggles, financial, emotional, and because of that, Jahseh was essentially passed around.
Not with her full-time?
Not at all. He lived primarily with his grandmother, Colette Jones, in Pompano Beach and Lauderhill. And this isn't just, mom's busy working 2 jobs. This is a fundamental lack of attachment from day one.
I remember reading an interview, I think it was from his time in juvie, where he was asked about his dad, and his response was just scathing. He just said, "What's a father?"
Right. And his father was incarcerated on RICO charges when Jahseh was 10 years old. So he's serving a 9-year sentence during the most formative years of his son's life. That absence, it just leaves a vacuum.
Beautiful.
But it wasn't just the absence of a role model, it was the active presence of trauma. The things this kid saw. The sources are heavy. He witnessed physical torture in his neighborhood. He told stories about seeing people get raped.
And then there's the story about his uncle.
The suicide. Jahseh was the one who found his uncle's body. Hanging. And that image, the hanging body, it just haunts his lyrics later on. You hear it in his music. It's not a metaphor for him. It's a memory.
There is one story from his childhood that gets cited in every single profile, every documentary. It's almost become folklore at this point, the stabbing story.
This is the foundational myth of XXXTentacion. It's his origin story. The story goes that when he was 6 years old, 6H, a man was attacking his mother. And Jahseh allegedly grabbed a knife or a piece of glass, depends on who tells it.
And he stabbed the guy.
He tried to. He ran at the guy and tried to stab him to protect his mom.
At 6 years old, at 6, most kids are scared of the dark or, worrying about losing a tooth. They are not intervening in violent domestic disputes with a weapon.
Exactly. Now, we have to be really careful here. The police reports from that time don't explicitly corroborate a 6-year-old stabbing someone. But trauma experts who have analyzed his life suggest that whether the details are 100% factual or just exaggerated by memory, the emotional truth is what matters.
What do you mean by that?
He learned at kindergarten age that violence was a valid language, that it was a tool, not just for aggression, but for protection.
And more importantly, it was a tool to protect his mother. That's key. Even though their relationship was so volatile, he saw himself as her protector.
That set up a pattern that defined his entire life. I am the violent protector. But, that kind of behavior, it doesn't really work in a classroom.
Not at all. And the school records show that. He was a misfit from day one. He was expelled from middle school for fighting. He was kicked out of the school choir, which, by the way, the idea of X in a choir robe is just hard to picture.
His aunt forced him to join to channel his energy. It didn't last long. He attacked another student. And the reason he gave is so telling. He claimed the student just touched him.
That seems to be a consistent trigger for him, the invasion of his personal space.
It's a classic hypervigilant response. It comes from trauma. When you grow up in an environment where you witness constant violence, you develop a hair trigger response. You start to interpret completely neutral actions as threats.
So if someone just bumps into you by accident.
But they aren't being clumsy. In your mind, they're attacking you. You have to react with overwhelming force.
There's also the physical aspect we should mention. He wasn't a big guy. He wasn't physically imposing.
Not at all, 5'6".
Yeah.
And he had a ventricular septal defect, a literal hole in his heart from birth.
So you have the Napoleon complex, this medical vulnerability, the massive childhood trauma, and the absentee parents. I mean, it's a cocktail for disaster.
And that disaster manifests, as it so often does, in the juvenile justice system. Around 2013 or 2014, he lands in a youth detention center for gun possession. And this, right here, this is the crucible. This is where Jahseh Onfroy dies and XXXTentacion begins.
Because of who he meets there.
Because he meets Stokely Goulburn, better known to the world as Ski Mask the Slump God.
It's wild to think about that. These two kids locked up in a Florida juvie, basically inventing a whole new subgenre of hip-hop while they're doing time.
They bonded over freestyling. It was their escape.
Yeah.
But what's so fascinating in the detention records and in his own interviews about it is the deep contradiction in X's behavior even then.
How so?
On one hand, he positions himself as a protector. He tells this now famous story about defending a gay cellmate who was being bullied.
Yeah.
He frames himself as this righteous vigilante standing up against the bullies.
But there's always a but with him.
There's always a but. He then admits to brutally attacking that same cellmate later, nearly beating him to death, because he thought the guy was staring at him while he was changing his clothes.
There it is again. The hypervigilance. Don't look at me. Don't touch me. That hair trigger.
It shows the absolute fracture in his identity. He wants to be the savior, the hero, but his impulse control is just non-existent. He later claimed in interviews, "I'm not homophobic, I support gay marriage," but in that high-pressure, testosterone-filled environment, his immediate reaction to feeling vulnerable was extreme violence.
You know, the most important thing to come out of that stint in juvie wasn't the fights, though. It was the plan. When they got out, they had a roadmap for their future.
But the roadmap wasn't originally music. That's what people forget. The plan was home invasions.
Seriously?
Yes. He and Ski Mask were going to get out and just rob houses. That was the career path they had laid out.
Wow, that's grim. We're going to get out of jail so we can commit crimes that will put us right back in prison.
It is. But Jahseh pivots. A girlfriend at the time encourages him to focus on music. He buys a cheap blue snowball microphone. He decides, I'm going to take all this rage, all this chaos, and put it into audio. And in 2013, he uploads his first track, Vice City, to a platform that would change everything, SoundCloud.
Okay, we have to stop right there. We need to talk about the sound. Because if you were listening to the radio in 2013, 2014, you had Drake, you had Katy Perry, you had this super polished, high-fidelity production. The industry standard was clean.
Crystal clear.
Then you put on an early XXXTentacion track, and it sounds like you're listening through broken speakers.
That was the genius of it. We call it SoundCloud rap now, but at the time, the establishment just called it bad mixing. X realized something absolutely crucial, maybe by accident, maybe just by pure intuition. Distortion feels like emotion.
Explain that a bit more. What do you mean distortion feels like emotion?
When you clip the audio, when the bass is so loud that it physically distorts the waveform, it creates a visceral reaction in the listener. It sounds like the song is literally falling apart. It sounds like the equipment can't handle the anger.
It sounds like a panic attack.
It sounds like panic. It sounds like rage. He wasn't trying to emulate the clean $1 million studio sound. He was leaning into the limitations of his cheap gear and turning a bug into a feature.
So the whole lo-fi aesthetic wasn't just, oh, I can't afford a proper studio. It was a deliberate choice. It was, this sounds more real.
Precisely. It's the democratization of distortion. It's exactly what punk rock did in the 70s. The Sex Pistols didn't want to sound like Pink Floyd. X didn't want to sound like Drake. He wanted to sound like a riot.
And his influences, they reflect that really weird mix. He wasn't just listening to Tupac or Biggie.
Not at all. He cited Kurt Cobain constantly. He loved Papa Roach, 3 Days Grace. He was a huge nu metal fan. But in the same breath, he talked about loving The Weeknd and, surprisingly, Lana Del Rey.
Lana Del Rey. That feels like a stretch. How does that connect?
Not if you listen to the lyrics and the moods. He was obsessed with the melancholic cinematic sadness she projected. Her whole aesthetic is about being beautiful and broken, and you can hear it in his music. X would go from screaming his lungs out over a distorted 808 bass, essentially doing nu metal vocals, to singing these incredibly fragile, often off-key piano ballads.
It's that versatility that confused people, right? Was he a rapper? Was he a punk singer? An emo kid? What box do you put him in?
He was all of it.
Yeah.
And the internet, especially the kids on SoundCloud and Tumblr, they ate it up. He formed the collective Members Only with Ski Mask, and they started generating this really intense cult following in South Florida. But the match in the powder keg, the song that changed everything, was Look at Me.
I remember the first time I heard Look at Me, I actually checked my headphones because I thought the wire was loose. The bass was so fuzzy, so blown out.
It was an assault on the ears, released in late 2015, but it doesn't really go nuclear until early 2017. And we have to address the elephant in the room when we talk about that, or rather, the owl.
The KMT controversy.
This is a classic moment in internet music history. Drake, the biggest artist in the world, previews a song called KMT during a show in Amsterdam. And the flow, that aggressive triplet flow, sounded suspiciously similar to the one on Look at Me.
That, like a hooligan eye, I'm just like, ah, that cadence.
Exactly, that cadence.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair, the triplet flow is pretty common in rap. It was popularized by Migos. But the cadence, the delivery, the aggression, it felt very, very similar.
And Drake denied stealing it.
Of course. But X was in jail at the time, facing charges, and he went on the warpath from his jail cell. He gave interviews over the phone calling Drake a bitch. He accused him of stealing culture from an incarcerated kid.
Which is such a bold move for an underground artist who's, facing serious felony charges to just go after the biggest star in the world like that.
But it worked. It was the perfect David versus Goliath narrative. Suddenly, millions of Drake fans who had never heard of X were asking, who is this kid with a half-blonde, half-black hair?
The Cruella de Vil look. That branding was just undeniable.
It was. But here is where the story takes a very, very sharp and dark turn. Because while his Spotify numbers are ticking up into the millions, his real life is spiraling into absolute unchecked violence. And we need to talk about this cycle of violence section of our research. And I want to be very clear to you listening. This isn't just he got into some fights. This is serious criminal behavior.
Yeah, looking at the timeline, the rap sheet is longer than the discography at this point. It starts with the robbery in 2016.
The home invasion of a man named Shay Thomas. X and some associates break in, pistol whip the guy, steal an iPad, a PlayStation, and $20. It's gritty, low-level, violent crime. He pleads no contest, gets probation, but then the table S incident.
Dylan Turner, who is his manager.
His own manager. This one is chilling because it's not random. It's someone on his own team. There's a dispute over money, a few $1,000s. X believes Turner is withholding cash from him.
So what does he do?
He breaks into Turner's apartment. He holds a knife to his stomach, screaming, "What if I stab you? What if I kill you right now?"
And then he actually does it.
He plunges the knife into his abdomen. And the aftermath is just as indicative of his psychology as the act itself. X allegedly forces Turner to drop the charges in exchange for returning his computer, which held all his music files. But X had already wiped the computer clean.
That's incredibly manipulative.
It's Machiavellian.
Yeah.
And then, as a final twist, he pays Turner's hospital bills and apologizes. It establishes this terrifying pattern, an extreme, impulsive, violent act, followed by a transactional attempt to fix it. I stabbed you, but here's the money for the stitches, so we're good, right?
But even the Tabs Liz incident, as awful as it is, it gets completely overshadowed by the name Geneva Ayala.
Geneva Ayala. This is the center of the moral black hole when it comes to XXXTentacion. She was his ex-girlfriend, and the allegations she brought forward in October 2016 are some of the most disturbing I've ever read in any celebrity case.
We have to warn you listening here. This is graphic.
It is. She accused him of beating her regularly, of choking her until she passed out, of holding her head underwater in the bathtub until she nearly drowned, of threatening to cut her tongue out with a knife.
And there was a specific incident involving what, a barbecue fork?
A barbecue fork and a wire grill brush. He allegedly held them up to her face and told her to pick which one he was going to penetrate her with. It's torture. It's sadism. And the charge that stuck the hardest in the public consciousness, the one everyone remembers, was aggravated battery of a pregnant woman.
Now, there is some dispute in the sources about the pregnancy itself.
Right. And it's a key point. Later, in secretly recorded audio, you can hear X telling his friends that he doubted she was actually pregnant. But in the eyes of the law, and certainly in the context of the abuse, the terror he inflicted was real, regardless of her medical status at the time.
And his fans. His fan base, they didn't believe her. Or maybe they just didn't care.
This is the cult aspect we talked about. His fans went after Ayala. They harassed her online. They doxed her. They showed up at her court dates to intimidate her. They claimed she was lying for money. They claimed her very visible injuries were just makeup. They concocted this entire online conspiracy that she was framing him to ruin his career just as it was taking off.
But then, years later, after he died, the pitchfork tape comes out.
The smoking gun. There's no other way to describe it. This was secret audio released posthumously by Pitchfork. In it, X is talking to some friends, and he says explicitly on tape, "I already bashed her face. I done made her look bad." He confesses.
It's right there, on tape.
It is. And in that same tape, he alludes to a completely separate stabbing incident involving 8 people in Deerfield Beach. He says, "I got no tear," referring to a teardrop tattoo, "but I done stabbed 8 people.
So he was admitting to crimes the police didn't even have pinned on him. He was bragging about it.
Yes. And this is the fundamental tension of his entire story. You have this tape where he sounds like an absolute remorseless psychopath, and then you have his debut album, 17.
Which came out in August of 2017, right in the middle of all this.
And it is one of the most heartbreaking, vulnerable albums you will ever hear. Tracks like Jocelyn Flores, dedicated to a friend who committed suicide in his hotel room while he was there. Fuck Love. These songs are raw, open wounds. He is singing about wanting to die, about being unlovable, about the immense pain inside him.
And that's the hook, isn't it? That's the core of the paradox. If he was just a violent thug, nobody would care. But he was a violent thug who could articulate the depths of teenage depression better than anyone else in the entire genre.
He effectively monetized his own mental illness. He created a parasocial relationship where his fans felt like, he gets me. He is damaged just like I am. And because they identified so deeply with his pain, they felt compelled to defend his violence.
It's like, to them, Geneva Ayala wasn't a victim of his violence.
She was an obstacle to his happiness. She was the reason their hero was sad. It's a deeply twisted logic.
It's weaponized empathy. He used his own vulnerability as a shield for his brutality.
That is a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
And it worked. His second album, which came out in early 2018, debuts at #1 on the Billboard 200. Sad becomes a global anthem. He is, by every metric, on top of the world, but the legal walls are closing in fast. He's facing decades in prison. The witness tampering charges were piling up.
And this brings us to early 2018, the redemption arc, or the alleged redemption arc.
The helping hand era. Suddenly, X's social media completely changes. He's posting about charity. He's donating instruments and video games to foster homes. He starts the Helping Hand Challenge, encouraging other rappers to do good deeds.
Then he gets involved with Parkland, which was a huge story at the time.
The Stoneman Douglas shooting happened right in his backyard. It was his community. He released the song Hope and dedicated it to the victims. He went and visited Anthony Borges, a survivor who was shot 5 times in the hospital. He announced he was going back to school to get his GED. He was settling down with a new girlfriend, Jahseh Sanchez.
So I have to play the skeptic here. I look at this timeline and I say, his massive domestic violence trial is coming up. His lawyer almost certainly told him to clean up his public image so the jury sees a philanthropist, not a monster.
That is the cynical and perhaps the most realistic view. The timing is incredibly suspicious. If he goes to trial as XXXTentacion, the monster, he only gets 20 years. He goes as Jahseh, the reformed philanthropist, maybe he gets leniency. It's a classic PR move.
But is it possible it was real? That there was a genuine change happening?
We also have to consider he was only 20 years old. The human brain isn't even fully developed at that age. Is it possible he was genuinely horrified by who he had become? He talked a lot about wanting to kill his old self. He said in a vlog, "I'm going to stop being a bad person. I'm going to be a better person."
He was also getting into some really weird spiritual stuff around this time, right? This wasn't just like, I'm going to start going to church.
Oh, no, not at all. It was anthroposophy, the philosophy of Rudolf Steiner.
That's a deep cut for a SoundCloud rapper from Florida. What even is that?
It's very esoteric. It's a spiritual philosophy that deals with, spiritual science and the nature of the human being. He was reading books on the occult. He was obsessed with the concept of indigo children.
Indigo children.
It's this new age idea that certain youths possess special, almost supernatural traits and are here to, like, usher in a new era for humanity. And he believes he was one of them.
And reincarnation was a big theme for him, too.
A huge theme. He believed in the cycle of death and rebirth. He told people that he felt he couldn't break the cycle and move on until he lived one life without harming other people.
Which he clearly had not done.
And he knew that. He felt he had already failed the test for this lifetime. He was obsessed with the color blue during this period, dyeing his hair blue, buying a blue microphone. He was trying to signal this profound spiritual shift, whether it was mania or genuine growth or just a really good PR strategy. We never got to find out.
Because of June 18th, 2018?
The day the clock ran out, Riva Motorsports, Deerfield Beach, Florida.
Walk us through what happened. The sources are pretty clear. This wasn't a random drive-by shooting. This was a setup.
It was a targeted ambush. X goes to the dealership to look at motorcycles. He's with his uncle, and he's carrying a Louis Vuitton bag. Inside that bag is $50,000 in cash.
It's carrying around 50 grand.
It's the rapper lifestyle. It's a flex. He had just gone to the bank, but it made him a target. He leaves the dealership, gets into his black BMW i8, which is a very conspicuous car. It has those dramatic butterfly doors. He tries to pull out of the parking lot.
And he's blocked.
A black Dodge Journey SUV cuts him off, blocking the exit completely. Two men jump out. They're masked. They're armed. They don't say get out of the car. They don't try to carjack him. They go straight for that Louis Vuitton bag.
There's a struggle over the bag.
A brief one. X refuses to let go of it. And then shots are fired. Multiple times at point-blank range in the neck. The robbers grab the bag, jump back in the SUV, and they peel off. And X is just left slumping in the driver's seat.
And just like that, the most controversial, the most streamed, the most hated, and the most loved artist of his entire generation is gone.
At 20 years old.
The aftermath was it was insane. I remember the videos circulating on social media before the news outlets had even confirmed it.
It was the first smartphone assassination of a major star. It was a new level of macabre. Fans were watching these blurry, horrific videos of his body in the car on Twitter while TMZ was still trying to verify the death. It was gruesome, and it was immediate.
And the music.
Yeah.
Just exploded.
Sad. Jumped from number 52 all the way to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was the first posthumous number 1 for a lead artist since the Notorious B.I.G. in 1997. That puts him in the history books forever.
But the legal system didn't stop. They did catch the guys who did it.
They did. 4 men. Michael Boatwright, Trayvon Newsom, Dedrick Williams, and Robert Allen. It took a long time. The trial wasn't until 2023, but 3 of them were convicted of first-degree murder, life sentences. It wasn't a rival rap beef. It wasn't some grand conspiracy. It was just a robbery gone horribly wrong. Just greed. They wanted the bag.
But now we're left with the legacy, and this is a really hard part. His estate, his mother, they started releasing posthumous albums. Skins. Bad Vibes Forever.
And this is where it gets kind of icky for a lot of people. Skins was barely 20 minutes long. It felt unfinished. Bad Vibes Forever felt like a Frankenstein project. They were taking unfinished demos, sometimes just a hook or a mumble track he had recorded on his phone, and slapping 3 or 4 guest features on it to create a song.
It really felt like they were milking a ghost.
It did. And then they released NFTs of his old music. It felt like the commercial machine was just stripping the carcass for parts. Critics, they hated it. They called it exploitative. But the fans, they consumed all of it. They were just desperate for anything new from him in any form.
So where do we land on this? How do you sum it all up? We have the Diamond Records. We have the confirmed domestic abuse. We have the music that helped millions of kids. We have the tragic, violent death. How do we synthesize this?
I think X represents the death of the perfect victim, or the perfect villain narrative. He was both. He was a perpetrator of terrible, unforgivable violence. He broke a woman's spirit and her body. That is a fact, confirmed by his own voice on that tape. But he also, and this is just as true, saved lives.
Saved lives? You really think that's true, that it's not an exaggeration?
I've seen the letters from fans. I've read the thousands of comments. Kids who say, I had the pills in my hand, I was going to kill myself, but I heard Jocelyn Flores and I realized I wasn't alone. You can't just dismiss that. You can't take that away from his legacy either.
It's the classic Wagner problem, right? Can beautiful art come from an ugly soul?
With X, it's even more complex than that. I don't think you can separate them because the art was the ugliness. The reason the music worked, the reason it resonated, was because it was so damaged. If he had been a happy, well-adjusted kid from the suburbs, he never would have made Look at Me or Sad.
Hmm.
The trauma that made him a monster was the exact same trauma that made him a star.
That is a terrifying thought, that we as a culture rewarded his trauma.
We did. We streamed it. We consumed it. His legacy is a caution. He absolutely changed the sound of modern rap forever. Everyone from Juice WRLD to Billie Eilish has cited his influence. The distorted bass, the emo lyrics, that's the norm now. But he's also a reminder that unresolved trauma just destroys everything around it. He destroyed his victims, he destroyed his own peace of mind, and eventually the violent lifestyle he built for himself destroyed him.
If he had lived, if that SUV hadn't blocked him in that day, do you think he would have actually changed, or would we be doing a deep dive right now on his 20-year prison sentence?
That is the unanswerable question, isn't it? Was the helping hand era a mask, or was it a metamorphosis? We will never, ever know. And maybe that mystery, that unresolved question mark, is why we're all still talking about him.
A heavy one today, but a necessary one, I think.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. Take care of yourselves out there.